Today on Biblical Higher Ed Talk, I sit down with David Wright, President Emeritus of Indiana Wesleyan University, to discuss the current state of Christian higher education. As a former college president, David shares with us the challenges and opportunities in our sector. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Philip Dearborn, president of ABHE, and we are honored to have as our guest this week David Wright, President Emeritus of Indiana Wesleyan University. And David recently retired from IWU after serving there for 9 years as their president. And in retirement, he's working with Christian colleges and universities with missional alignment and business model optimization. And we're going to hear a little bit about that in our conversation today. He also spends time coaching higher education leaders, helping them navigate the complexities of higher education. And I've invited David in to talk about, at least from his perspective, the current state of Christian and biblical higher education. He has a unique perspective, having served as a president and now working with colleges and universities and their business models. So, David, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks a lot, Philip. It's a pleasure to be with you.
And from the start, I'm just going to say thank you to you for your investment in Christian higher education. I have often said on this podcast and in other contexts that the position of college president has to be one of the most difficult positions, one of the most difficult leadership positions out there across all industries. And you certainly put in a number of years. And now you're in that unique position to be able to come alongside and help others navigate the presidency. So on behalf of those of us in ABHE of Biblical Higher Education, just a word of thanks for your leadership over those years.
Well, thank you so much, Philip. It's been a wonderful privilege. You know, God gives you blessings throughout your life that you never thought you would ever have. And that's certainly been the story in my career.
Great. So we have a few questions that we're going to work through before we get to that, just so our audience can get to know you a little bit more. Share with us a defining moment in your life as you reflect back. I'm sure there are many moments, but share with us one moment that comes to mind that God used to propel you forward in either your personal or your professional life.
Yeah, thank you. It's a privilege to reflect back on a career and see how God moved one's life forward and shaped the trajectory of a career and a life. I was privileged to grow up kind of in an old school time. In my upbringing, we were taught that you needed to really understand God's calling on your life, that God was going to give you a call to something. And when I was 18, I certainly felt a call to ministry. I didn't understand at the time what that ministry would be. I thought I would be a missionary to overseas country for all of my career. It turned out I was for a while, but higher ed ended up being my calling, and it's been a privilege to serve in that area. But the one defining feature or experience that I'll share with you, because it was a watershed moment for my career. I went to Indiana Wesleyan University, undergrad degree in Christian ministries, Portland Seminary at George Fox University for a master's degree in biblical studies, and then PhD at the University of Kentucky. But there was really not much of a tradition in my family or really in my church to do doctoral study. A few people did, and I was not a great student. So when I thought I'm going to do a PhD, there wasn't a whole lot of support for that idea among my family and so forth. What do you think you're doing here? But I just had a sense that was where God was leading me. And, you know, it turned out that doctoral program was a watershed moment that enabled the career that I had. I could not have had the career that God led me into from that period. I was in my early 30s. So it was early on in my career, 2 little kids. My wife's a nurse. She worked and earned our living. And I took care of the kids and did my doctoral program at the University of Kentucky. And it was transformational intellectually, professionally. It provided me a platform that God could use then in the various places that he put me. So I would say that was really the moment, one of the moments that shaped my career.
Yeah. So would that have been before then you went to the mission field?
We had actually gone to Haiti. We had been in Haiti for one term of service, and Helen worked in a clinic, and I reopened a Bible college. I was running a Bible college. And that was part of my sense. You know, I had studied Bible. I studied the content. And in the back of my mind, I thought, well, someday I'll do a PhD in New Testament studies. And then I realized on the mission field, in what I was doing, there was so little need for a very, narrow focus on some aspect of New Testament studies, where there was a much more of a need to understand how to prepare ministers for the
Yeah.
growing Haitian church. And I realized I don't know much about higher ed. I've
Yeah.
been through it, but I
Yeah.
don't know much about it.
Yeah.
So that really was the impetus for me to do that study.
Yeah. And I think about now many of our colleges and universities and seminaries within ABHE have doctoral programs. And I've had the privilege of teaching at the PhD level. And those were some of the most rewarding teaching experiences, because you think about the students that are in those groups and answering God's call, people like you, and for God to use that as a foundation for really what then set your trajectory forward to work in Christian higher education. And it's such a unique industry. I often think that if left to our own devices, we may not necessarily choose a career in higher education, right? Except for God's call in our lives. And it's been neat to see how all of those circumstances came together for you and kind of built you becoming president and then fulfilling 9 years at IWU. So thanks for sharing that. Appreciate it. So we're leading in a unique day. You retired from the presidency, I think, a couple years ago. Is that right?
Yeah, almost 2 years.
Yeah, yeah. So you're still current with everything that's there, and I've served in higher education as well for 30 years actually this year. And it seems like there have always been pressures that come and go in Christian higher education, biblical higher education, and higher education in general. But it feels a little bit different now. So off of your experiences, and then as you're working with colleges and universities, what would you say are the top 3 challenges facing our industry today?
Yeah, I had 25 years at Indiana Wesleyan, started there in 94 and worked in their, I got pulled into the adult programs, so fast growing, got to really do a lot of innovative things. And then I was a faculty member, became provost, and then the last 9 as president. So I've been privileged to see, the last 30 years of development of higher ed here in this country. And it really is a fascinating time. I think the 3 major challenges I would highlight, I really think the first one is how to remain faithful to and current with the mission of the institution. Uh, when I look at the landscape today, is particularly in the work that I'm doing now with sort of consulting, coaching, helping institutions thrive. The ones that I see that are thriving are really clear about their mission. They've figured out how to articulate their mission, how to embed their mission in their operations, how to tell people what their mission is in a winsome way, and not as window dressing, but as a real defining characteristic of their institutions. Across the board, the institutions that I see thriving today are really clear about their mission. And and part of the reason I think this is a different day is that 2 things have changed. Even, 25, 30 years ago when I started, there was a presumption that a college degree was a thing of value to be pursued. And that assumption really isn't there anymore. It's still there for a part of the audience that we serve, but not for everybody. That is eroding. And so one's mission as an educational institution, you just can't take for granted that people will understand it, know what it's about, and why they ought to value it. And you have to be able to articulate that. And then the other thing that has really changed for us as Christian institutions, particularly the ABHE membership and the CCCU membership, there was a day when there was a presumption that the Judeo-Christian framework that underpins everything we do, the biblical framework of what we do, was a positive factor in society. That's that's just not true anymore. Again, it's true in pockets, but it's not true generally across our culture any longer. So to be able to articulate why a biblical mission for higher education, a truly faithful mission in higher education is a thing of value and of substance, not just for our students, but for the society as a whole, that when you come to a Christian institution like the ABHE or the CCCU institutions, you're coming there to be able to do good work for the society, for the world as a whole. That used to be understood. It was in the water. It was in the atmosphere. No longer. So we have to be really clear about mission. I think that's the first challenge. The second one, I would say, and I know this language is a little bit problematic in higher ed circles, particularly among faculty and academic types like myself, but I really come to believe you have to be able to optimize your business model for the times we live in. And I think of the business model simply as this: it's a way of optimizing the operations of your institution so you function at a healthy margin to ensure the long-term success of your mission. That's the way I think of a mission, of a business model. And it has various parts to it. And the reason I think that is a challenge today is that the traditional way we've done business as colleges doesn't work very well anymore. We hear the term, it's a broken business model. Let me give you an example. This is very fresh New York Times article within the last week. So Vanderbilt has now hit $100,000 a year to attend Vanderbilt, all in $100,000 a year. I mean, that it's hard to believe. But here's the interesting thing. This is public knowledge. You can research this. My understanding is the cost of education. I mean, just take a guess. What do you think the cost of educating a student at Vanderbilt? That's what they charge, but what's the cost?
It's probably going to be higher than that, huh?
It is $120,000 a year to educate a student at Vanderbilt. Now, think of any other enterprise where you lose $20,000 on every student who's paying you $100,000.
But David, we're nonprofits. We're not supposed to be about revenue.
Well, that's what we mean by a broken business model.
Yeah, it is.
You have to come up with that money somewhere.
Yeah.
Now, how they do it is they have a $10 billion endowment.
And not everybody has 10 billion.
They don't really care about that. I mean, they ought to, but they don't, because they make up their loss. They cover their loss with another source of revenue. Well, unfortunately, most of our faith-based institutions don't have those revenues. We used to have denominations, some of us, that would pay. We don't get government funding. So that's what I mean. The ability to operate at a healthy margin so that we secure the long-term success of our mission, that's why business model matters. And we have to think about the way to do business in this current environment so that we secure our future. So I think that's the second challenge. The third one, I think, is people. I've often said a university or college, it's not a manufacturing facility. It's not like you take in raw material and you massage it and you turn out a product of some kind. We use that language, but really colleges and universities are communities of people gathered around ideas and inculcating a certain kind of character and formation of understanding, of knowledge, and of skill, and of disposition in students. That's what we do. Well, you can't do that without people. You have to have the right people. And I think increasingly it's important for us to find the right people to be in our institutions, to let them know, when you're at our institution, this is what you're doing. This is the mission here. And you have to align with that mission to be in our institution. You may be perfectly qualified to be in another one.
Yeah.
But if you can't align with this mission, you can't be in our institution. This is what we do.
So then, I'm curious, as president, how much of your percentage of time of wringing your hands or energies did you spend around people issues?
Oh, it's what you do. I mean, when you're in leadership, particularly in a community of people, you're always telling the story of the institution. This is who we are. This is what we're about. This is why what we do matters. This is what we celebrate. Here are the challenges. So you're really telling that story and drawing people into that mission that you have and helping people celebrate it, celebrating the people who are doing it well. And then, of course, there are the inevitable challenges that you work your way through. But so I think that's the third. So those are the three: being really clear about mission, having a business model that is sustainable today so our mission doesn't suffer. And thirdly, having the people and keeping the people aligned and encouraged and focused on mission and being successful at the enterprise.
And I think each one of those challenges are ongoing. And I think are markers probably every one of our institutions. And the people one, I think, is a particularly interesting one, because one thing people fail to realize is that organizations grow and change over time. Even if they maintain the integrity of the mission, they still change. And the profile of what fit personnel wise at one stage of the institution 5, 10, 15 years later may not necessarily be the profile that works moving forward. And I think that's a challenge for specifically Christian organizations, because the Christian element comes in that we feel like, we've got to love each other in this process. So it perhaps causes us to not make decisions about people soon enough.
Well, I think that's true. People who work with me, some of them criticize me for being too slow to fire people. Some of the people I had to let go probably would be surprised at that, but so I don't think you should be cavalier in letting people go. But you are absolutely right. Many of us, unfortunately, have gone through budget cutting exercises where we have to let good people go, and it's an awful experience. And I've had people tell me, "Boy, it would have been nice to work back in the day when you were, growing and everything, and you wouldn't have these problems." And I've told them, "Well, I had to let people go when we were growing, but I had to let them go for different reasons. As the institution changes and grows over time, have to more. Thankfully, many people can grow with the organization if you help
Yep.
them do that, but not everybody can. And
Right.
yeah, that's an important point.
Yeah. So you've been in the seat of the presidency. One of the things I really like about this podcast is our audience tends to be on the younger side of emerging leaders, millennials and Gen Zers within our college and university context. A number of them are aspiring to potentially be a president someday, or at least sit at the C-suite. So from a retired president's perspective, looking back now on even your experiences, what words of advice would you give to those up and coming leaders?
It's great to work with emerging leaders. It's one of the things I do now that I enjoy the most is the coaching and mentoring work with emerging leaders. I do a lot of it pro bono, just informally, and then some formal engagements. I think that as we go through our career and we begin to realize that there may be that level of leadership in our future, and we start to think about how do we prepare ourselves for that, I offer two words. One is to be a person of influence, and the second is to be a person of consequence. Recently, I had a young leader ask me that very question. What should I think about in this career? I don't know that I want to be a president, but I feel like I need to think about it. And I said, well, think about this. How can you ensure that you are a person of influence and then a person of consequence? So let me tell you what I mean by that. Influence is about my ability to earn the trust of other people. I think being a student of people these days, learning how to listen well, learning how to understand people, what motivates them, what drives their behavior, what they're wrestling with that impacts their ability to serve well in their chosen place. Being a student of people, learning how to be astute, having emotional intelligence, so that people look to you for sort of guidance and direction. I always looked for that. Whenever I hired people, I wanted to find people that everybody else said, look at her. She's phenomenal. She's helped me so much. She helped me succeed. And I don't mean influence in the TikTok way, influencer in that way, because that's such a shallow
It
definition.
is. Yeah.
And this is part of our calling, I think, to be people that other people look to as folks they can trust.
Which is a key point, because emotional intelligence is undervalued. I think naturally, just as we are younger leaders, there are other things that cloud our desire to advance or to grow, and we forget along the way the incredible role of emotional intelligence that plays, of being able to read people, read situations, because that then ultimately does build the foundation for influence.
It does. And, I think things are changing now. People want to work with people who have respect for others. So the old model of the type A personality who kind of filled up a room, I mean, that's wonderful. God created them too. But that was the model of leadership, and it still happens. But I think more and more people are looking for a different kind of leader, and one who is astute, who cares about others, who enables others to succeed. That's what I mean by a person of influence, and cultivating those skills as you're coming up and those abilities, really important. The other thing I talk about is being a person of consequence. And what I mean by that is cultivating the skill and ability to actually make things happen. So it's my knowledge base, continually building my knowledge base, building the suite of skills that I have to make things happen. Again, as I promoted people out, those are things I looked for. Is this a person that other people gravitate to and trust? And secondly, what have they done that has demonstrated the ability to get stuff done, to do good work? Those are the two things that I think we focus on. And I didn't have a plan for a career. I was just kind of following God's leadership along the way. But I'll tell you, I always wanted to be the first person in and the last person out. I wanted to be the person that they said when there was a really hard problem or something to solve, I wanted them to say, well, let's go get David. He'll figure it out. Not to promote myself, but it's just, I like that ability to say, yeah, give me a challenge. I think we can get it fixed. I mean, there's something about that sort of fed me, fed my
Yeah.
motivation. And that's what I mean. Influence and consequence. I think when we focus on those things, we build the ability then for God to use us in a more responsible place.
Those are such great words, to be stewards of what's in front of us and to be faithful with what God has given to us and to show ourselves worthy of influence, but also that we actually show results and let God take care of the future, whatever direction that happens to be. And I think it's great the way you shared it too, because you didn't necessarily seek those things. You were just being faithful in the moment to demonstrate your value and your worth. And then God clearly led in other leadership positions. Switching gears a little bit, talking about one of the natural tensions that happen within the academy is that tension between faculty and administration. I think every institution of higher learning has that tension. You had to navigate through it. You came out of the faculty side of things to become a president. You had to manage that. Is it a good tension? And from what you're had as experiences, what's the best way to engage faculty in the decision making and shared governance within our institutions?
It's a great question, and one that comes up all the time in our industry, if you will. It's one of the key issues that we have to think through. And I think institutions that get this right have a strength to draw
Mm-hmm.
upon, and those that don't are always wasting energy on lack of trust,
Mm-hmm.
broken relationships, lack of alignment, lack of focus. There's just so much wasted energy in this area if you don't get this right. So,
Mm-hmm.
and being human beings who come at things in different ways from different perspectives, it's ready-made for conflict. First, you ask, is it a good thing? I really do believe it is a strength. I think
It
if
is. Yeah.
drawing upon the gifts and abilities that God has given to your faculty members and on their collective perspective as faculty members, that can be a great strength. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some things that work against it in the modern postmodern university. And one is the specialization of roles. Specialization of roles means that we know less and less about the broad enterprise and
Yeah.
more about our little slice. And that's
Yeah.
true of academics.
Yeah.
There are very few academics that have a broad sense of the academy. They specialize in their discipline,
Mm-hmm.
and it truncates their ability to think about the enterprise as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
It focuses them on their knowledge discipline rather than on the students who are coming to study with them. So,
Yeah.
so these specializations, I think, break down the ability for us to work well together. And administrators are the same. I mean, administrators get siloed. They get focused
Mm-hmm.
on their thing and they don't see the whole enterprise.
Yeah.
So anything we can do to begin creating common ground, commonality across our silos, across our disciplines, I think is a good thing. We could talk more about this, but I'll tell you one thing I did early on when I was provost, because, we were wrestling at Iowa with this thing. We did so many innovative things that were driven often by a small group of faculty, but really by administration. And so the broad faculty were saying, wait a minute, why aren't you consulting with us? Why aren't we involved in those decisions? So one of the things I did is I got the team together, the academic affairs committee, or in our case, it was a Senate. And I said, let's see if we can outline all the things that matter at the university. What are the categories of decisions that have to be made at the university? So there are things like admission requirements, assessment processes, curriculum, grading scales. I mean, there's just all kinds of things that university have to make decisions about, make policy about. So we made that list, and then I said, okay, let's figure out of these things, what is primarily the administrator's responsibility
Mm-hmm.
with consultation among the faculty, and what's primarily the faculty's responsibility with consultation of the administration.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's never going to be unilateral decision making.
Right.
It's going to be shared because we're a university and our accreditation requires that of us.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're always going to share, but where does the primary responsibility lie? And then what's the mechanism we're going to use to ensure that we have the collaboration?
Right.
And so that became the first page of our faculty handbook.
Mm.
And it was something we could always point back to say, well, this is what we agreed. So if it's a budget, that's primarily the administration. We're not going to make those decisions unilaterally. We're going to consult with faculty leaders. But at the end of the day, it's the administration that's going to set the budget.
Yeah.
But when it came to curricular issues and policy decisions around curriculum, we said to the faculty, because the decisions you make in curriculum have budgetary consequence, you have to consult with us.
Yeah.
But that's primarily your responsibility. We're not the faculty. That's
Mm-hmm.
your job. So that was an example of just a very practical thing we did that became kind of a contract between us that we could always refer to.
Yeah. And that's genius because what I find a lot of times it's more about the notion of it, non-specified. So we talk about the tension between faculty and administration. We talk about shared governance, but we talk at it at a very global level, right? As opposed to actually getting down to the specifics that you actually have a tool, a framework, a structure by which we can understand, okay, this is how we're going to manage this institution. Here's how we're going to manage this tension so that there's a clear understanding of, okay, this is as faculty, this is our role. This is our area. Administration, you're going to respect the fact that we're taking lead on this and not without input, because like you said, there's definitely connections over, but what a great idea and tool to kind of define reality of, okay, this is how we're going to navigate this particular tension. And then we just live in it. And then when we violate that, at least we have a sense of, oh, wow, okay, we did tread in an area that we shouldn't have. We're sorry about that. How can we fix it moving forward? That's a very, very practical idea. Thanks for sharing that. So we're getting towards the end here. We actually only have 2 minutes left. So last question. You're currently working with colleges and universities to help them discover, you mentioned this earlier, those operational efficiencies. So curious, are you having success? And are leaders open to making the necessary changes to operate more efficiently?
Great questions. I wish I had more than 2 minutes for that. But first of all, are we succeeding? Yes, it's been amazing. I could tell you there are 25 partners now in the network that I'm a part of. And I could tell you more than one that we're on a trajectory for closure. But by doing the hard work of looking at the elements of their business model and figuring out what they needed to change most quickly, not everything you try works. But if you have a plan and you put in place that plan, you really work at the most important things, it can have a transformational impact. And we've actually seen that happen. The question, whether leaders are willing, unfortunately, I wrote a little article recently on the deadly allure of the status quo. It is hard. I mean, there's been research on this. It's really hard to break out of the status quo.
Yeah.
And there usually has to be a trigger. It either has to be, well, we're going to close if we don't do something. And even then, boards and presidents tend to wait too late. Or there has to be a visionary leader or set of leaders who say, God's given us some strength. How do we leverage the strength to enlarge our vision, enlarge our coasts, if you will? And what do we need to do that? In those two cases, we do see change. People are willing to roll up their sleeves and do the hard work. But unfortunately, it's a battle. It takes a lot of hard work to get the will to do the things that need to be done.
Yeah. And I'm hopeful that some of that tide is changing. I think the clock to closure is a shorter clock than what it was maybe 15, 20 years ago, where just the reality, the volatility of the market, the cost of higher education, the declining enrollments, the enrollment cliff, all of those things I think are quickening the reality for many of our institutions. And I think it's a great way for you to kind of give back to the industry to say, okay, within this, one, how do we become more efficient? And then two, how do we leverage the strengths? And it takes people with open hands, open hearts, who aren't just grabbing onto tradition or the way things were. Those are the schools that are going to close. But those who are looking at it from a different perspective to say, this is the promise we can deliver. And here are 2 or 3 or 4 other institutions that we can partner with in the process so that together we're actually stronger than any one of us as a single institution. And you're navigating those waters, and Lord's blessings to you as you do that. So we've come to the end. And David, I just want to say thank you for sharing your wisdom and experiences with us today.
That's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And we'll make sure for this episode to put in some of the organizations that David is working with, as well as his email address if anyone is listening and wants to make that connection. And has that article that you mentioned been published yet, or is it in the process?
It should be out in the next week or two.
Okay, so we'll definitely put a link to that on our show notes so that if you're listening to this and you want to read that article, you can access it there. So until next time, stay kingdom focused.